2 is what they say on the podcast. I started this podcast, and then I went back and listened to it, and it sounded like I was broadcasting from the lavatory of a 737. Uh, so I went back. Fortunately, I didn't get too far into the podcast. I am Jeff. I'm your host here on the podcast. There's a lot of stuff happening in aviation. There's so much to get into. I myself just got back from St. Lucia. If you listened to our previous episode, which was truly a Destination Aviation episode, down into the St. Lucia Airport. Talked a lot about that, so go back and listen to that podcast if you're so interested into it. There's so many things, like I said, coming. We'll get into that, but just to kind of follow up on that, because I did, the departure, left the resort easy. It was about an hour and 30-minute drive from the north part of the country down to the southern part of the country where the larger airport is at. So we highlighted that in the past episode there. Immigration was smooth and easy. Went to the American Airlines ticket counter. The people there at the airport, they try to lure you into carrying your bags for you, obviously for a tip if you choose to do that. Some people did. They don't understand probably what the difference between is the resort that you're staying at, but everybody's kind of waiting on the curb with the hand carts to carry your bags in for tip related stuff. So kind of an independent company there. I carried my own bags, went to the counter, checked in, simple, easy. Immigration was fine. They just looked at the paperwork. Left. Seating was, what to be expected. It was very tight. There was multiple flights in the terminal there leaving at once. They have some restaurants and concessions upstairs. I went up there, after kind of everything that I ate at the resort, I didn't really feel like having an actual meal, so I just grabbed some Pringles and a drink at the little shop up top, and then came back down the stairs. Stood for a while, was able to find a seat. Every gate, so we were Americans at gate 4, United was next to it, JetBlue, Air Canada. Interesting enough, we'll talk about the accident, but I was there when that accident was actually happening. My phone service wasn't so great in St. Lucia, so I didn't know the accident was going on. But the flight in from Toronto was delayed, and I heard everybody kind of complaining about it, but that's because they shut down the Toronto airport for that Delta CRJ 900 accident, which we'll get into that details later on. But it was interesting to kind of be live there listening to it, and then, like I said, there was the very limited seating, people sitting on the floor, kind of what you would expect from a country like St. Lucia. A lot of times you go into those islands and they have smaller facilities. I was in Jamaica and Montego Bay before, same thing there, very small terminal. When I did a lot of traveling in Mexico, it was actually funny. They built a brand new terminal in Querétaro. It looks great from the outside, but it's almost like they got like 95% done with the terminal, and then the last 5% they're like, the heck with it, we're not going to do anything. So there was literally like wires spliced together with electrical tape down to the TV monitors. Tiles were missing from the ceiling. Like I said, it's pretty much got to like 95% done. This is nice. It was outside boarding, so maybe I'll add some pictures there onto the Instagram of the outside boarding area as we walk down, British Airways, stuff like that. I got to see their 787 and get down to our 737 800. It's funny, while I was saying that, I almost was wondering, is the beginning clip playing in my head? Is what's happening here? But November 268 4 Kilo, which is a Cessna 180, just flew over the house, probably taken off out of the local airport here. Currently at 114 knots and 2.7 nautical miles away from my current position. So Godspeed to that airport. But it was loud. I heard it. It kind of sounded like somebody was revving something up there. Like I said, very much like the beginning of the episode. So as I was sitting here, I was like, wait a second. Is something happening here that I'm not aware of? But no, the soundboard is intact. But I digress. Where was I? Okay, we were at the St. Lucia airport. Easy unloading, get on, ramp loading, up onto the airplane. Simple, easy peasy. Before I left the resort, I actually downloaded the Global Entry app. I've never used the app before. I've had Global Entry for a while now in TSA PreCheck, but I've never used the application, which I pre-filled out the app before I left the resort when I had Wi-Fi. And then it said in there that at that point, you can take a picture of yourself, but not to do that until you're on the ground, in this case, Miami. And not every airport allows the app to be used for accessing. You might have to go in and actually use the global entry kiosk, which was, simple and easy. And I didn't really think about the connection time. I had an hour and 40 minutes to get off my flight, get through customs, get my bag, get it rechecked, go through TSA, and get down to my next American flight. But the process was simple and easy. I took my picture while I was sitting in my seat, got off the plane, went through customs, literally just walked through. The guy said my name, walked out, waited most for my bag, but that wasn't even that long. Got my bag, went back, rechecked it. TSA was very long line. I didn't see a clear pre-check line in that, and I used to fly through Houston a lot, and they didn't have a pre-check line when you were connecting right back through an international flight. So I didn't know if they would have it here. If they do have one at Miami, I didn't see it. So the line was long, but they were moving it. TSA was moving quick. So I was able to get through that, back into the terminal. The terminal was packed. So it was good. Made it to the flight. That was easy. I do have a funny story about that flight, but I'm going to go back to the St. Lucia airport just real quick. I am not a fan of putting my stickers on stuff that would degrade whatever that is. You won't find a Destination Aviation sticker on a mailbox if it's clean. But if there's something, you go into a bar or something like that, and there becomes a thing where either they put it on the doors of the bathroom or whatever. In the St. Lucia airport, I'll put a picture of this on the Instagram, there is a hand dryer in there that people have loaded up their stickers on, and it seems like they've been fine with it. So there is a Destination Aviation sticker at the St. Lucia airport. We'll see how long it lasts. It looked like people were loading their stickers up on there. It's probably already covered up, but threw one on there. And also, too, we do sell those stickers on the website. So if you have access to a PC or tablet, device, phone, something that maybe doesn't sound like this, or if it does sound like that, you can still buy a sticker. They're not that expensive. $5. Feel free to get on, support the show. And if we ever see each other in person somewhere down the runway, I will always, usually, I won't say always, usually I carry some stickers with me. So if we see each other, I'll be happy to hand those out as well. St. Louis experience was pretty good. Like I said, go back if you want to listen to that episode, talk about some of the things I did while I was there. But easy peasy getting back. It was funny. So a couple of things. My flight from St. Lucia to Miami. Now, I don't know where most people stand in life. This is something that I don't necessarily like, but maybe people can send me a comment at dapodcast85@gmail.com. Now, just real quick before I get back to this conversation, you're already be like, hey, wait a second, I just heard a chime there. Been working, like I said, with some groups, and they've been giving some pointers and some thoughts and some ideas and some things that I'm mixing with. So anytime I mention my email now, I'm going to throw in that sound just kind of as a, hey, there's my email to kind of remind, I'm talking about communication to me directly. So when you hear that little ping, that's what it is. Don't want people to think, what the heck was that? It wasn't another stray aircraft coming over the top of the house like before. This one was deliberate. All right, back to the story. The person kind of sitting adjacent from me, so right side, I was back in just economy class, but I was in the aisle seat, so they were in the aisle seat on the opposite side, one row in front of me. As soon as we took off from St. Lucia, they took their shoes off, no socks, bare feet, and they started spreading their toes on the seat in front of them. So from the back of the armrest to the back of the seat. I find that completely disgusting. I find it to be rude. If you're on an airplane, I say keep your socks and your shoes on. But I obviously whatever. It's not like I would say anything in that situation. But I had mentioned this in a podcast before, but I had an experience where somebody jammed their toes into my seat. I was at a window seat flying back from Hawaii, and I looked down and I had these 5 toes jammed up, really touching where my love handle scenario would be of my body. And it was horrifying. So maybe I just have post-traumatic stress syndrome from this, but I did find that to be, I'll say, rude. I don't know. You're in public, Put your shoes back on. You're on an airplane. You don't need to be spreading your toes all over someone's seat. But anyways, so I talked about getting back into Miami, got on the American flight back to O'Hare, and we'll talk a little bit about politics here in a second because that's what we do on the show here or there. But one of the interesting things was I was sitting at my gate waiting. I had grabbed a sandwich real quick just to eat at the gate, something to scarf down before I got onto the plane. And I look over behind the counter at the jet bridge itself, and I thought, that guy looks like the mayor of Chicago, Brandon Johnson. And turns out it was. He was being escorted by the Miami-Dade Counterterrorism Squad, division of Miami Sheriff Department. I don't know, but they got on the plane. Everybody was fine. Nobody was rude or anything like that to him. Some people pointed and said, "Hey, that's Mayor Johnson of New York." So that was kind of a cool thing to see. He was sitting a few rows behind me. I was sitting more towards the first class area. And I, he had his whole team. It looked like it was an official duty job there. And then another weird thing, because I've talked about Northern Exposure, the TV show from the early 90s on here. And that was the next thing. I was sitting there. I was one row back from first class, so in the main cabin. But one of the people sitting in first class, he was watching Northern Exposure on his iPad. And the flight attendant ended up yelling at him a few times to close his iPad for takeoff. And he seemed to be not happy with that. But another weird thing. When do you ever see Northern Exposure? If you haven't seen it, go look it up. It's got that moose. It was not in syndication for years because of the beginning of that. They had that song with the moose. Da, 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 da. That's a good rendition, but you probably should go listen to it. But yeah, it was a good flight back. So that trip was good. So while we were gone, so many things had happened. We talked about the Delta flight. There was been some near misses. Aviation is just kind of in the forefront of everyone's minds right now. It's just crazy. These things, a lot of this stuff that we talk about, people in the industry, right? Things that kind of naturally progress throughout any given day of operations. Things are getting highlighted. Now we talk in this podcast about general aviation and some of the frequencies of those accidents, which tend to be almost daily, especially smaller aircraft day, every other day. The small aircraft has some sort of an incident. There's so many of them around and flying. But commercial aviation still, it's one of those things. We've had some real examples here in the near term, but like we had talked about in our previous podcast, it is a long time since we've seen these type of real major accidents with commercial airliners, or what the Federal Aviation Administration of the United States calls Part 121, or scheduled service. So we'll get into a little bit of that, some of the other news that's happening. Now, you did hear me talk a little bit before about the ping after the email. Now we're trying to grow up around here. No more just humming 1990s theme song tunes. We're going to step it up a notch. So we're going to give you our new theme for what we're calling the news segment, where we kind of talk about everything that is happening. Give a little more structure to the show. No more me just sitting around talking about geese and ducks. All right, so here's the opening, and then we'll talk about some things that are happening in the aviation industry. Well, that was our new opening. I hope everybody loved it. I know I did. It inspired me to wear a suit. You can't see it, obviously, because we're audio. But full suit, tie, looks great. Not a t-shirt, swear. It's not just a t-shirt. Anyways, let's get to some of the news that's happening around in aviation. So, American Airlines Flight 292, which was from New York to India's capital of New Delhi, had to do a U-turn over the Caspian Sea. It's funny, I was watching some World War II stuff the other night when I couldn't go to sleep, and I was looking, because oftentimes people ask me about the Great Lakes and the kind of size difference, and a lot of people, obviously, it makes sense. Can you see from one side to the other? No, you can't. And so when I was looking, it's like, oh, the Caspian Sea, that's actually pretty huge on the map. So just a random stupid fact of me not being able to sleep and watching World War II, and then getting engrossed into geography to actually look at the Caspian Sea. But in this case, American Airlines Flight 292 returned a U-turn, I should say, not returning, but U-turning to Rome, where there actually was a bomb threat on the aircraft that was called in. Turned out to be non-credible to this aircraft, but the 787 was escorted by the Italy military after the bomb alert back to Rome, not back to Rome. And there's actually some images of it online. I'll put one of these in the Instagram, because it's pretty cool to see from the kind of the cockpit view. Now, from what I can tell online, the escorts for this 787 from Italy were the Eurofighter Typhoon, which is a European twin-engine supersonic fighter jet. It is a collaborative effort between the UK, Germany, Italy, and Spain. and involves defense companies like Airbus and BAE Systems. So that's pretty cool. I mean, it's not cool that happened. Obviously, you get to the bottom of who called in this bomb threat, but the fact that you can see some of these pictures, which you normally don't see, and then people seem like they were able to get back on their route to New Delhi after the 787 landed in Rome and was cleared to proceed on its way. And then out of Harry Reid Airport, which everybody knows on here that's listened to me before, when I was laughed out of the room about it being called Harry Reid instead of McCarran, at the Harry Reid International Airport. Yeah, maybe I should just let that one go. Maybe this will be the last time I speak of it. We have new audio. Maybe this will be the last time I mention that. If you've listened to any of our previous podcasts, you'll know the backstory to the Harry Reid thing. But a man jumped onto the wing of a 737 with Alaska Airlines, and then you can see I think it's the Clark County Sheriff Department on the wing as well, trying to capture him. He kicks his shoes off and he tries to go up the winglet and ultimately falls down onto the taxiway. So I don't know, that's an old adage, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, except for not this, because if you Google it, there are plenty videos online of it. It looks like he's fine. I mean, he has a hard landing there. Don't know what he was doing. Maybe he was on some drugs. Who knows? I've seen some weird stuff myself back in the days at airports. People driving down runways expecting to get to North Korea in their Honda Civic, that it will just take off, and they end up driving into a ditch or into something, some sort of structure. There's a lot of weird stuff that happens out there, not just in aviation, but other places. This was an interesting story. So it was Qatar Airways, which I've probably talked about this in my past. I've worked a little bit with Qatar Airways on some projects at airports. I actually have a model of one of their aircraft that they were so kind to give me. And they do have a high-end product. In our case, it was cargo that they were operating. But when we would get diversions on Qatar, usually, people that fly Qatar like it. It's interesting because I worked with someone who said, in the United States, you have to call it Qatar, even though people call it Qatar. It's a back and forth. They probably had mentioned this too before, but the guy that came in was like, no, I was like, you just call it Qatar. And one, they weren't too snobbish about it either way, but however way you prefer to say it. In this particular case, there was a passenger that passed away on their flight. They came out of the lavatory, and then unfortunately they died. It was a flight from Australia, which was going to Doha, so Melbourne to Doha, and the couple that were there saw this person die. Unfortunately, this female, as they came out of the bathroom, it looked like obviously natural causes of some kind, but they continued on the flight. They had a 4-row of seats. They put her in the 4th seat next to them for about 4 hours on the flight. Not unheard of. I've seen this before on certain flights where people get out and they pass along in a flight. I was actually just thinking the other night, I was watching Star Wars, and that's how Carrie Fisher actually passed away. She passed away on a flight. So you can see it divert. You can also see, this where they continue on the flight, put a blanket over them or something. And this couple that were sitting next to him were going to Venice. They were very upset over the whole situation. I think they're still on holiday. I don't know. The news article's kind of back and forth on that. But from my example earlier about feet on an airplane, just curious what people might have to say about this. So feel free to drop me a line at dapodcast85@gmail.com. This is another thing that's come up. Southwest Airlines. We've talked a little bit about this in past episodes about Southwest Airlines and Elliott, who is the financial group that of investors, kind of, I don't want to say hostile takeover, but they have a takeover of Southwest, basically. I would say just above 11%, which gives them some board seats. And, we've talked about how that's impacted, like their open seating policy, some of the stuff that Southwest has been known for throughout the years. But one of the things that just happened, the first time in the 53-year history of Southwest Airlines, something that they always used to say is they've never had any layoffs, but that is no longer the case. Because as of February 17th, they laid off 1,750 employees, all from the Dallas Love Field headquarters. That equates to around 15% of the Southwest Airlines corporate positions through a restructuring. So I've been seeing a lot of the people that I know, through like the LinkedIn's and everything in the world have been saying, either one, they're impacted. I do know a few people that work there. I don't know anybody that's been impacted yet. Most of the people that I know, I think, are in the analyst departments. But yeah, unfortunate news. We've talked about this before. I don't know. The Southwest Airlines has been changing some of their business model. I don't know for sure, but they used to be the largest domestic seat capacity, kind of like the carrier in the United States. So they had more domestic seats than any other airline. But hopefully, though, through this process, everybody will find themselves a position, find a job, get to where they, can still maybe be in the industry, maybe change industry, and Southwest Airlines can remain, get out of this and be healthy. I don't know. You see a lot of things. I saw some comments back and forth on LinkedIn that it is healthy and this wasn't needed, and then I've also seen that yes, a restructuring is needed. I don't know in this case. It's interesting because Southwest had such a business model, and then after that kind of meltdown with their ticketing system and their cancellations, it really started to cascade from there. So it's one of those brands that you were so synonymous with, people loved it. It's just interesting to see. And along with that, more kind of back to my neck in the woods here in the Illinois region, I was actually downtown Chicago yesterday when this happened at the Midway Airport. But a Southwest Airlines flight was landing at the Midway Airport, and it had to power up on landing. I think it was 3-1 Center, and we'll talk a little bit about the details here further on it. But landing on I believe 3-1 Center, and a Flexjet, which is a competitor to NetJets, a private charter 135, so 135 being the federal aviation regulation that they fly under. Sounds like they got confused on their procedures at the Midway Airport and crossed the same runway that Southwest Airlines was landing on. And there's some dramatic video online, if you haven't seen it, you can go out and take a look at it, of this aircraft coming down to land, and then this Flexjet was crossing in front of them. So let's talk a little bit about the specific details of the flights, where they're from, the aircraft tail numbers, and then we're actually going to listen to the air traffic control audio from this incident. So we'll start the audio here of the air traffic controllers talking to Flexjet, which sounds like it's departing from Signature Flight Support, which is a fixed-based operator at the Midway Airport. So we'll start it, and then maybe we'll stop to talk points here, but we'll start here.
Flexjet 560 Signature with Tango Taxi.
Flexjet 560, runway, actually departure frequency is 119.35. Runway 22 left. What taxi are you coming out of?
And we're over at Whiskey, Flexjet 560.
Flexjet 560 regular taxi via Foxtrot and hold short runway 22 right. Plan for runway 22 left.
All right, plan for 22 left, Foxtrot Whiskey, Flexjet 560.
So far up to this point, everything sounds normal. Nothing really outside the, clarification there, but they're getting their instruction. They're leaving the ramp and they're going to the runway for their departure. So Flexjet 560, which you hear on the air traffic control radio here, that is a Challenger 350, like we said, owned by the company Flexjet, competitor of NetJets. I think actually both are based out of Columbus, Ohio. Flexjet's fractional ownership, so you don't own the aircraft directly, but you charter the aircraft, founded in 1995, and is currently owned by the private investment firm Directional Aviation. Flexjet 560 was going to Knoxville, Tennessee, out of the Midway Airport. So let's go back here to ATC recordings.
Hey, Rob, Flexjet 560. Just want to confirm our taxi instructions for 22 left from Signature.
Yeah, where on the ramp are you, sir?
We're at Signature Aviation at Alpha taxi.
Okay, taxi Alpha, Foxtrot, hold short at 22 right.
Alpha Fox, hold short, 22 right, Flexjet 560.
Flexjet 560, turn left on runway 4 left, cross runway 31 left, and hold short on runway 31 center.
All right, left on 4 left, cross the 22 or 13 center, Flexjet 560.
which is
So now is where we're starting into a little confusion point here with the air traffic control tower. And if you look at the airfield at Midway, so one, Midway is a very constrained airport. If you've ever landed there, it's in a very dense neighborhood. It's really like, if you ever played Sim City when you were younger, it's really like, looks like it was a plot of airport with everything that built up around it. Opening in 1927, being the main airport for Chicago until O'Hare opened in the 50s. It's a lot of taxiways, a lot of runways, parallel runways. So when you have a parallel runway, runways are on, as we've talked before, heading, so 3-1 in this case, so 3-1 left is 310 degrees on a compass, 3-1 center is 310 degrees on a compass, and 3-1 right is 310 degrees on a compass. So it's considering that they're all the same heading. Those three runways are parallel to each other, and that's where you get the left, the center, and the right. So now they're back taxiing on runway 4 left, 22 right, going across runway 31 left with instructions to hold short of 31 center. So let's go back to the ATC recording.
which is 560 negative. Cross runway 31 left, hold short runway 31 center.
Cross 31 left, hold short 31 center, Flexjet 560.
So at that point, the pilot reported back what he was supposed to. So air traffic controllers will give you hold short instructions, and those are mandatory to repeat back to the air traffic control tower. At the same time, you have Southwest Airlines flight inbound to runway 31 center, flight 2504 from Omaha, Nebraska. It was landing on the center runway, and this Flexjet 560 was told to hold short of runway 31 center, and they did repeat that back to the air traffic control tower. So let's go back to the recordings.
Southwest 2504 going around.
2504, roger, that's maintain 3000.
Southwest 2504 up to 3000.
Flexjet 560, hold your position there.
Position Flexjet 560.
So what just happened there was they crossed 3-1 left. Flexjet 560 said they were going to hold short of 3-1 center. They didn't. They crossed the runway. At the same time, it sounds like the pilot of the Southwest aircraft saw the aircraft coming across and then did a go around itself. When you watch the video online, it does get within close proximity of the aircraft here. Now, online, they're saying that the separation was roughly 2,050 feet. But obviously, you're landing, you're going at a high rate of speed. You eat that up pretty quick. So quick maneuvering on the Southwest pilot's part to keep moving, and then you can hear the air traffic control tower tell at this point, now the Flexjet has crossed 3-1 center, and it's holding short of 3-1 right. One thing to note, I actually just saw a notice on this, 3-1 right is getting ready to be decommissioned at the Midway Airport. So it will no longer be a runway at that facility. They're going to turn it into a taxiway from what it sounds like right now. My guess would be a potential expansion of the terminal as well at Midway, because it is space constraint and Southwest Airlines is their main carrier there. And if you look at the airfield diagram, 3-1 right is the closest runway to the wings of the terminal, and it could make a lot of sense for a potential expansion at an airport that's pretty much landlocked. Anyways, back to this. 560 is now holding short of runway 3-1 right.
560, continue across the hold short of hotel.
Cross hold short hotel, Flexjet 560.
So 2504, unable turn left heading 220.
Left heading 220, Southwest 2504.
Flexjet 560, your instructions are to hold short of runway 31 center.
That's Tower Southwest 2504, how'd that happen?
So 2504, climbing 3000, contact Chicago approach 128.2.
128.2, Southwest 2504.
Flexjet 560, possible pilot deviation. Advise you contact Midway Tower at a number when you're ready to copy.
Flexjet 560, ready to copy.
Flexjet 560, it's 773-884.
So at that point, really what they're saying, you could hear the Southwest pilot ask, how did that happen? Clearly from listening to the audio, it sounds like the Flexjet was told to hold short of center, didn't cross. There's a lot, you're in a complex airfield. There's a lot of things that are designed at an airport to tell a pilot when you're approaching a runway, especially this is what they refer to as a Part 139 airport, another regulation, right? We talked about 121, 135. All of these numbers are just regulations that are regulating some body of aviation from the Federal Aviation Administration. So 135 is a charter operator, 139 is a commercial service airport certification. And so here you would have an enhanced center line. The aircraft has a center line that it's going down on the runway. This would be an enhanced line, double marking, so 2 solid bars, 2 dash bars, mandatory red and white signs. So when you look out the window at an airport and you see that red and white sign, what does that mean? It's like a stop sign, right? It tells you that this is a mandatory surface here being the runway. And so all of these, along with what they call like wigwags or runway guard lights, which are yellow flashing lights, to indicate that you're coming up to something, and this would have the runway designator on it. So in this case, it would have been 13 center and 31 center would have been the sign that you would see with red background with white lettering telling the pilot, like a stop sign, to stop and verify. In this case, they were told to hold short of center. They didn't. Like I said, it's not uncommon to have pilot deviations. But in this case, this is what would be a severe incursion, because obviously you caused the aircraft operator to deviate from its original path. So just so you know, when you're an airport operator and you have an incursion, the air traffic control tower, if you have an air traffic control tower there, if not a safety inspector that would come out if you didn't have an air traffic control tower, they're going to rate this in categories from A to D. Category A is a serious incident in which a collision was narrowly avoided. Category B is an incident in which separation decreases. There's a significant potential for collision, which may result in a time-critical corrective evasive response to avoid the collision. Category C is an incident characterized by ample time and/or distance to avoid the collision. And Category D is an incident that meets the definition of a runway incursion, such as an incorrect presence of a single vehicle, person, aircraft on the protected area of the surface designated for landing and takeoff of aircraft, but no immediate safety consequences. I've seen these in the past, like where I've worked, where a lot of these are Category D, where it's maybe like a taxiway to a ramp and there's no aircraft involved, and somebody just forgot to call that. It's a mandatory surface. Mandatory surfaces at airports are surfaces that are controlled by the air traffic control tower. So when you look at what they define as a movement area to a non-movement area. Movement area just means it's controlled by air traffic control tower. Non-movement area, not controlled by the air traffic control tower. So in this case, they were on a movement area controlled by the air traffic control tower. They didn't follow the proper instructions. And this I would categorize as a Category A, as a serious incident in which a collision was narrowly avoided. So kudos to the Southwest pilot for having, one, situational awareness to know that something was happening and that they, immediately took evasive action. In this situation where this aircraft was crossing in midfield, it probably would have been a catastrophic incident where I don't think we've talked about it on this podcast, but when the two 747s hit on Tenerife Island, similar where there was fog in that incident, but same kind of collision, 2 aircraft on the runway. So this could have been very catastrophic. It was a clear day, sunny day, visibility was good, so that wasn't a factor. But a mistake sounds like on the pilot's parts. And then there was a comment made by DOT Secretary Sean Duffy that if pilots aren't following air traffic control tower instructions, that their pilot license will be pulled. And then Chuy Garcia, which is the Congress member from that area, basically talked about safety of aviation and that there will be an investigation into it. It sounds like the NTSB is already putting this on the Flexjet pilots, at least from what I saw earlier today. But a narrowly avoided incident, and while I was in downtown, people started messaging me and texting me about it. One, to put on the podcast, but secondly, it was, it's in the area and it's just happening. And thankfully, nobody was hurt. The Flexjet continued on its way to Knoxville, and the Southwest Airlines from Omaha was vectored back out and then landed at Midway safely. So glad to see in this case that nobody was hurt. So we did talk at the beginning when I was down in St. Lucia about the Delta flight. So Delta flight 4819, which was operated by Endeavor, kind of similar to what PSA had with the American Airlines. It's a regional carrier, but the livery and everything of the aircraft, if you're an operator, or I take that back, if you're a passenger on that aircraft, the operator looks like Delta Airlines, right? You really wouldn't know the difference. It has the same Delta scheme that a Delta mainline would have. But Delta Connection Flight 4819 scheduled international service from Minneapolis St. Paul International Airport to the Toronto Pearson International Airport in Canada, which was a CRJ 900, so it was a 700 that had the accident outside DCA, but same Bombardier, same manufacturer of the aircraft that had the incident at DCA. But like I said, I was actually in the terminal down in St. Lucia when this happened on February 17th. The aircraft was en route to Toronto, and then upon landing, the aircraft turned to its right, and you saw the wing of the aircraft, the right wing, shear off, which caused the fireball, right? Because the jet fuel is stored within the wings of this aircraft. So you saw the fire streak, and then the aftermath of the aircraft sitting upright. At a commercial service airport in Canada, the ICAO rules, International Civil Aviation Authority organization, they have the same as the United States. You have to have aircraft rescue firefighting at the airport that has to get to the midpoint of the farthest runway within 3 minutes, and then any secondary responding vehicles from the aircraft rescue firefighting department have to be there within 4 minutes. And so the operator, in an instance like this, the fire department's right on top of it. So we did see those videos, the dramatic videos of it online. Like I said, I was sitting there and I kept hearing the Toronto flights in St. Lucia being told that, they're getting delayed, this is delayed, and didn't know what it was at the time, but it was because the airport had closed down because of this accident. But with the total survivors of this is everyone, which is fantastic. So there were 80 people in total on board, 76 passengers, and 4 crew members. All survived. 21 people reported injuries on the aircraft. And so it's an amazing thing that everybody survived. There's actually a video online. Somebody was waiting to depart, and they videoed this aircraft landing. And, a lot of people have come to me with thoughts and ideas, and, you can see some of the stuff that's floating around out there. But I will say the United States has the most stringent rules for what we just talked about, 121 scheduled service. You have to have 1,500 flying hour time. ICAO, which we just talked about, the International Civil Aviation Organization, they also have normally will adopt the rules of the United States and what's put forward if the FAA has something. But in this case, the 1,500-hour rule hasn't been adopted by them as standard. This came about after the Colgan Air accident in upstate New York, when there was that accident in 2009, which we referenced back at the DCA, was the last real major accident for commercial service for an airline based in the United States. So in this case, the crew had the required amount of time, at least 1,500 hours. When you look at it online, it does look like a hard landing on the right side of the aircraft. Now, some people have come to me and said, people that have flown these, that typically the angle of attack for this type of aircraft when landing is more of a flat landing. The wind conditions at the time at the airport, the weather was not great at all. One, it had been snowing, and it's interesting, when I was in St. Lucia, I look at stuff online, and this accident obviously hadn't happened until I was leaving, but I did see that their aircraft rescue firefighting vehicles are red, and I don't know if some of their snow equipment's red too, like red in color, but it was a big stark contrast to the white snow that was on the ground, to the red of the vehicles that are painted at the airport. And so as I looked at those vehicles, I was just more of a hey, that's interesting. And it was this airport. And then the next day, unfortunately, there was this accident that happened there that everybody did survive on. But when people did come and talk to me about it, the wind conditions that day were blowing snow, which was the same for the previous 2 days, 32 miles per hour, with gusts up to 40 miles an hour, and a temperature roughly of 16.5 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 8.6 degrees Celsius. So the weather wasn't great. The runway did have coverage over it. There were some thoughts that lose some depth perception from maybe the pilots on the aircraft. Or did they potentially pick up wind shear when it came down? Because you see that kind of almost looks like that right main landing gear collapse, which is similar to that accident with the Motley Crew aircraft in Scottsdale where the left main gear collapsed. But in this case, right main gear collapse. You can see that left wing is still picking up airflow, right? They're designed to fly, so it flips the aircraft over completely and lands on the roof of the aircraft. Now, I will say kudos to all the passengers on the plane for having what it sounds like their seatbelts connected. I've been on flights where, usually on the runway people start disconnecting their seatbelts, but I've been on them where you're landing and people pop them off, which is just, a good stark reminder to keep your seatbelt fastened until you're at the gate. Especially if, like I said, an instance like this where, the plane flips over like this, it's a survivable incident, but if you fall out of your seat and hit your neck on the roof, maybe not. But, kudos. You can see some of the pictures online. I'll try to put some of those as well into the Instagram of the flight attendants. Just ever seemed like everybody was kind of hitting, okay, let's get out, get away from the aircraft. The aircraft rescue firefighting folks were right there on time to, put out any of the flames that were there. A cold day, but Delta has already offered $30,000 to each passenger with no strings attached. You can still sue. And it sounds like at least 4 passengers have already retained lawyers, one seeking $200,000 in potential damages. I did want to play some of the audio here from the air traffic control as we did with the last incident from over at Midway Airport, just to talk a little bit about the context of what was happening here. So let's listen to some air traffic control tower from the Delta crash at the Toronto Pearson Airport. And keeping in mind, too, not that this is a major factor, but there has been conversation before. Senator Ted Cruz had talked about this a lot. It doesn't sound like it's on the table now, but with DOJ and the reform in the past, in the United States, the FAA, the air traffic control tower, they are federal employees. In Canada, it's a privatized system. And so you hear a lot of, what you could say pros and cons back and forth. I would say I tend to hear more cons about the privatized system versus it being a public entity, but we can debate that a different day. So here we'll get into a little bit of the air traffic control tower frequencies.
Toronto Tower, 4819 outside, number 23.
4819, Toronto Tower, wind 27023, gust 33, clear the line on 823, my gas slight bump in the glide path, there'll be an aircraft in front of it.
So what we're just hearing right there is what we talked about. So this is Delta, but they're flying under Endeavor. So Endeavor 4819, they just gave him the weather for the landing on the runway. So that's what you just heard the controller confirm what the weather is like at the airport.
And 23, Endeavor 4819.
And the clearance to land on 23. In this case, 230 degrees runway.
4543, ground runway 248, Golf altimeter 2993.
So what you could hear there is a lot of yelling in the background. Probably what's happening is other controllers in the facility. Depending on the facility, you'll usually have multiple controllers up there. Probably somebody working clearance and ground. Sometimes it can be separate positions at an air traffic control tower. Someone working the local or the airspace control. So that you're kind of getting handed off from getting your clearance to taxiing on the ground to when you're on the runway and getting your departure out of an airport and potentially a supervisor up there. So it sounds like you're hearing that the aircraft has hit the ground, and if you watch the video online, it's pretty much immediate. Once it lands, that right gear goes down, and then the aircraft takes the right wing off, the left wing flips it over onto its back, which is probably what they're witnessing now in the tower.
Fire rescue on the runway.
He's asking for fire rescue on the runway.
Services, runway 23. Yeah, we're on it. We got the call going out.
7105, pull up around.
They're telling other aircraft here, 7105, to go around.
Airplane just crashed, 23. 7105, pull up around.
So they're telling the other aircraft here to go around. Typically, when there's a crash at an airport, the airport's immediately closed until, the ground operators. So usually the people that actually work at the airport are able to assess, talk to the aircraft rescue firefighting. When you have ARF, aircraft rescue firefighting, that's kind of the immediate response, and then you have mutual aid agreements of people responding within the communities to a crash.
Stay on the back, you can just stay there.
Flight 1 Midway, I got no traffic here, so just let me know what you'd like to do. We just had a crash on runway 23 here.
April, Roger. Yeah, we're discussing with their OTC whether they wanted to redeploy to this crash site or not.
Roger, 7105, contact departure 128.
Correct, 28 7105.
Okay, now all other aircraft in the frequency, just stand by. We've got an emergency going on. It's not happening now. We have a huge emergency on 23. You're not coming out. 157, we had an accident on 23. I don't really want to put you anywhere near there. Is there anywhere else you want to go right now? Okay, yeah, let's do that. Do the 180, and then November, just hold short of Echo for now, Paul 157. Red 1 in company ground.
So at this point, what we're talking about here is you have aircraft rescue firefighters responding to it. The aircraft has crashed. You can hear the plow operators. The air traffic control tower is doing a really good job of moving anybody away from this accident. You heard a little bit of conversation there from a medevac helicopter that was taking off anyways that may potentially have gotten rerouted back to this. They were kind of talking about that. So this, really what happens there is you have the eyes of the controller of the tower kind of getting the resources out there, mutual aid responding, trying to figure out exactly what's going on. Because if you think about an accident that happens at an airport like this, Toronto Pearson has multiple runways. So in this case, once the time allows, you could isolate it, close down that runway, work with in the United States, it would be the National Transportation Safety Board, which they would probably have a part in this, considering it originated from the U.S. and there is a relationship between Canada and the U.S. of kind of partnering on these accident investigations. But typically in the U.S., you're not moving anything until you get the go-ahead from the National Transportation Safety Board, or if they take that responsibility and give it down to the Flight Standards District Office, which is a division within the FAA, they potentially would be the ones that would say, okay, now you can start moving it. But in an incident like this with an airliner, that runway was probably closed at least a day, multiple days. And in an airport like Toronto Pearson, they have multiple runways that they could use in this incident. So, we'll have to kind of see where things go in the investigation on this. The weather was not great. The visibility itself was good, but it looked like snow cover, which, could lead to some depth perception issues. Like I said, you see online, it could have been hit with a bad wind shear. So we'll have to continue to monitor as we do with the rest of our investigations and see what happens here. But really glad to see that nobody was hurt in this particular incident, which is really good to hear. And so there was another accident that happened, two small aircraft just north of Tucson. This happened on Wednesday at the Marana Airport, which is a non-towered airport just north of Tucson. If you go back to some of our episodes, I was just in Tucson for a conference there. It was a Lancer 360, which is a small private aircraft, and a Cessna 172, which was registered to Embry-Riddle with a flight instructor and a student on board. The two aircraft collided at 8:28 a.m. just northwest of the airport there in Tucson. It's a busy airport, non-controlled. Most airports in the United States are actually not controlled. There's a little over 19,000 total airports in the United States, of which around 500 or so have air traffic control towers. So more than likely, especially if you're flying private, you're landing in airports without an uncontrolled airspace. So like where I fly here, most of the stuff that I normally do is within the Mode C veil, so you have to have your ADS-B, your broadcasting system on, kind of what we talked about in the DCA accident where the Black Hawk helicopter did not have their ADS-B broadcasting. It's like in my case here, I have it on, but when you get out, you may not have that as a visual if you're using things like ForeFlight. And then secondly, I know it sounds dangerous, but the reality is with the regs, if it's an uncontrolled airport, you actually don't have to make radio communications either. That's not required. You can land without making communications. I would never do that, but you do see it happen often. And also, too, if you're not getting a response back, if you're expecting to contact an air traffic control tower, there could be errors or something, too. Maybe you're broadcasting on the wrong frequency. But I don't know in this case. They were within close vicinity of each other. The Embry-Riddle aircraft collided on upwind from runway 12. The Lance Air unfortunately crashed, and both people on that aircraft were pronounced dead. And the Embry-Riddle aircraft was able to land So Embry-Riddle they have a huge worldwide campus. They have a campus in Daytona Beach, Florida, which is where I went to, and then they have a campus in Prescott, Arizona, which is where this aircraft originated from. And one of the crew members, actually, on the DCA accident with American, they were a graduate of the Prescott location. So some tragedy, unfortunately, happening there. And, it's just another lesson about, uncontrolled airspace and really keeping, and one, we have our instruments to rely on and things like ForeFlight. But, in those scenarios, keeping an eye out. So we'll be curious to see as we kind of track this, what happened there. But, considering that, there's less restrictions on a uncontrolled airport, it's not surprising to see some of this happen. Like I said, there's not that it's common, but it is something that you need to be aware of when you're flying into uncontrolled airspace. And so we're kind of move beyond what we're talking about with the news there. So we'll close out that segment of things that are kind of happening in the news area, and maybe a couple of things I want to talk about. I know I had mentioned before that I was reading that Dan Pedersen book, which is the guy who created the Top Gun flight school, who originated in Moline. And I just have to say, I'm not through the book, and maybe this changes, but if I were his current wife, which I don't know, maybe he wrote this book, and I was in 2019 after she passed on. But the beginning of the book, it's so kind of romantic, and he talks about the love of his life, and that when he flies up to the stratosphere, and he's out and about cruising in his aircraft, that the sky is as blue as her eyes, and all this really romantic stuff. And so all along I'm thinking, oh, that's really nice, and that's who he loved. So it gets through at least the part of the book I'm in now where they don't end up together. She gets together with a football player, and this is before he created Top Gun, so just while he's a naval aviator, and then he gets to a page where he's talking about who he met and had a daughter with. He's like, and then I was stationed in San Diego. I met my wife, lovely woman, and we had a daughter. And I'm like, well, I hope for his sake, however this works out in this book or towards the end, that if his current wife is still alive and reading that, or however it is, that that maybe he sweetens up throughout the book. But I'll say that if he's talking about a lost love the way that he did, and then that's what his wife gets, that he had his daughter with, I don't know. I mean, I guess kudos for being bold on how you write, but I'll say this, again, my butt kicked if that's how I wrote out a book on somebody that I was involved with. So I'm enjoying the book. I'm continuing to read it, but I did think that was a funny anecdote. And still in that kind of love atmosphere, somebody sent me the other day some ATC audio recording from a Breeze Airways. So that's a newer airline from the person that started the JetBlue. They created this airline. Anyways, this aircraft's coming in. He uses the frequency to ask out the air traffic controller, which I have a lot of air traffic controller friends, a lot of female air traffic controller friends. Obviously, I think most people would take offense to using the air traffic control tower frequencies this way, but I'll let you judge yourself. I'll play a little bit of that audio here as we round out the episode.
Hey there, I pulled you up on my number 2 radio, and I was like, hey, is it inappropriate to ask for a controller's number? Let's see, 516, do you want to send me a text sometime? No, seriously, I'm not interested like that, but figured you had a personality, it's kind of rare. Wow, what just happened tonight? Don't be too nice. On behalf of all pilots, I'd like to apologize.
So, if you hear the audio there, which it's a little, this audio is a little rough, but Moxie 516 is the call sign that Breeze Airways flies with, and you can hear it's either the pilot or the co-pilot, maybe the first officer, I'm not sure here, but you hear him ask, for a question, and then if the controller would like to send him a text sometime, and if it was in bad nature to basically ask for a phone number, she said she was married. He said, well, you have a nice personality that's unusual, which is a slam in itself. And then Then, she says, the other pilot gets on the one that says, whoa, different operator. And then, I don't even find that to be great either, because he's like, don't be too nice. Oh, okay, thanks. So it's just, I don't know, it's funny, in an unprofessional sense, I would think, but hey, you know what? Maybe it's not. You guys can be the judge of that. I guess people want to find romance everywhere. I've even heard there's an app for airports for people that are, whether flight attendants or crew, that, it's basically like a dating app. I don't know. In this case, it's interesting. Basically there's just some back and forth. So that's your Breeze Airways story for the day, and loving the sky. Don't know anything really beyond that, but we are getting far along in the episode here, everyone, so I hope you like some of the formatting change a little bit. I'm going to keep refining it. Feel free to either get online and buy one of our podcast stickers, or also to drop us a line at dapodcast85@gmail.com. And now that the sun is going down here, I am going to wrap this up, put some editing on it, get it out the door, get it on the airwaves. But thank you for listening, and until next time, my friends, I'll see you down the runway.